This seems
Hey guys.
so official.
Hey everyone, thanks for being here and not sneaking out for lunch early. So I'm Carrie Flynn, I'm a marketing reporter at Digiday, and I think everyone here requires no introduction. And we're just gonna get into it. But the obvious thing is you guys all work at ESPN, I've noticed.
Oh.
So,
Wait, can we just acknowledge that our pictures are in a different order there than they are here, so I feel really conflicted.
wow.
Yep.
I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
That's because it's. I'll explain it later.
See,
Yep.
that's why you're kid. She's smart.
So Ryan, we're gonna start with you. Walk me through, so pretend that for some reason someone in the audience doesn't know what ESPN is.
Yep.
How do you pitch it? How do you describe yourselves today? What's the audience to?
I think of we're sports, right? And we exist as sports, both in a coverage, discussion, partnership. And I say this all the time. Every one of us, no matter what job you have, has the same business card. And on the back, it says to serve sports fans anytime, anywhere. And that was the same mission that the company was founded with. It's the same today, and it's invoked in almost every conversation. And I think a lot of what we'll end up talking about today is, as we think about different platforms or screens or pieces of content, it is how is that serving fans, and how are you doing it in the platform and in the location that exists. But we're a sports company.
So would you say like nothing has really changed about the company? Because if it's like tied to the mission, I would think that your job is kind of newer than what ESPN used to be.
Plenty has changed with the company. I can't imagine a company that of any sustained period of time that doesn't go through significant change. That doesn't mean the mission has to change, though. And I think what my job represents and what people like Katie and Fitz and the talent and the resources we have around that are really thinking about how we interact and engage in new platforms, in new spaces, in new mediums, some of which are on mediums that we create and we operate. Some of them are places where we have large followings outside of our own site and screens. So that function itself the function specifically is relatively new. We've been, like the three of us have been working together for sub a year. But ESPN's been doing this kind of work in these kind of spaces, I would argue pioneering new reach since its founding.
Awesome. Katie, as someone I understand grew up watching ESPN and now you work there, what do you think you've noticed as like being a fan on the outside to now being on the inside that's different?
I will say people, it's funny when you work at ESPN, you know, Bristol's where they're headquartered, which is not a beautiful destination, no disrespect to Connecticut, but once you work there for a while, you hear people be like, oh, do you got to go to Bristol? And when I first started at ESPN, I was like, I can't wait to go to Bristol because it's this big, huge campus full of people who all love sports, and they're all there for sports. And they all do it in different ways, and everyone has a different job, but it really is the place that did it first, and that's been the leader in doing it forever. So Bristol is cool. The shine wears off, but it is cool.
See, I'm just going to hop in, even though you didn't ask me anything. But I will say this, like, as somebody, I was forced to move to Bristol. That was my
Be forced.
Yes.
The word forced.
Well, and I say that because, you know, when I got my deal offer, it came with the contingency, you must live in Bristol. So there was no, and my wife was like, oh, heck no, that's not going to happen. And so she still lives in Nashville, and I commute back and forth. But I will say this, what makes Bristol magic is, like, the word talent gets used a lot for Katie and I and what we do. The fact is, like, it's the most talented group of people you will ever find anywhere, and they're all super sports engaged. So, like, the Snapchat people are crazy talented, but they're also crazy, like, sports fans. So I think that there's a vibe. Every time I walk on campus, I'm still that guy that gets giddy, and I'm like, holy cow, to use a clean, family-friendly word, I work at ESPN. So I think that is the shine of Bristol. Like, is there a lot in Bristol that's great? No, but there's ESPN, and that's...
Doubletree has free cookies.
You know, they won't give them to you when you're not staying there. I found that out. I went in, I thought maybe, I'd stayed there a bunch. I thought maybe I could get cookies. No guy.
I know a guy. I'll hook you up.
A cookie.
Glad that happened. Awesome. Ryan, let's go back to you.
You got a cookie guy?
Let's go back to you, Ryan. I know you probably don't like to play favorites, but let's talk about what No, we're not talking about talent. We're going to talk about platforms. What social and digital platforms would you say are the most important to ESPN?
So we don't play favorites because we think of everything as its own property. And one thing I'm very proud of, and we have the freedom to do this, we also have the luxury of having the resources and so forth, is we don't create something and press publish across everything because we know it doesn't work that way. And I think, again, that's a luxury that we are able to take on, but what Katie does on Snap is very different than what you'll do on the Twitter shows. And it doesn't work. You can't take the same effort that we do daily on Snap and say, this is really good, let's put it on Facebook. Or let's take that same piece and put it on ESPN.com. So we think a lot about how does each environment, what necessitates being honest to the environment, take advantage of the platform. Turns out when you do that, the fans like it more. Turns out the partners like that more. We see better results. It does take greater resources. It takes a lot of experimentation, but you'll find what we do on each platform is itself unique to that effort.
Jason, would you say in terms of your day job, is there an important platform for you, though?
They're all different. I mean, so for anyone that doesn't know, my main, 5 days a week, I co-host Spain and Fitz, which is on ESPN Radio from 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern. Shameless plug. And then also I do Snapchat 1 day a week at least. And then, as Ryan alluded to, I do a lot of the Twitter live broadcast work. So I did everything from the NFL draft to college football playoff rankings reaction with Michael Jr. And each of them has a very different format. Each of them has a very different audience. And I think to use a specific example of that, the night that Alex Smith was traded from the Kansas City Chiefs to the Washington Redskins, I was just getting off air from radio. So I walked into the Snapchat night office and I was like, man, quarterback trade in the NFL, this is going to be great. And they were like, yeah, but Lonzo played today. And I'm like, what? So? Because in radio, NFL still rules so much of our audience and our market, and that's tested and that's studied and they know it. So in radio the next day, all that they were talking about was Alex Smith goes from the Chiefs to the Redskins. But for Snapchat that night, it was like a 30-second middle of the show in a regular season Lakers game where Lonzo went off was more important because each of them has a different audience. So to serve sports fans anytime, anywhere, you still have to be mindful of which sports fans are consuming what you're putting out on that specific platform. So that's the challenge.
And what time of day?
Oh, yeah.
Is it being watched live, on demand? Is it interactive? Like the Twitter stuff's all live. It's interactive. The Snapchat stuff, we might publish it at 5 a.m., but you might choose to watch it at noon. And so all of those and how the user finds it in the environment, what other content it sits next to, again, whether it's chronological or so forth, all that stuff matters, and it drives how we think about not just what content, but the presentation or the way that we interact with the fan, et cetera.
The number of times we'll go into our production meeting for Snapchat at night and throw something out, because I usually do the one that publishes at 5 a.m., and we hear all the time, hey, that's a day show. That's a day show story. Because in the daytime, they have time to dive into it. On the night, my job, my co-host is a highlight. So I've got 15 seconds to say something concise, to get to a highlight, to get somebody to why they're really consuming that episode. Whereas Katie can, she can take something on Snap and deep dive into it. On the night show, I don't have that luxury.
And with the quarterback trade situation, you've got to think for Snap, is there a visual for that? Because there really isn't. Unless you have video of him leaving his team and going to another team, there's nothing for them to watch when they're watching it on their phone. And so that's why you've got to treat them with different, it's tough. It's tougher than I thought it was going to be to come up with what content is going to keep people watching on an app that they can click through if they're bored. And you've got to catch them right away.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Snapchat. In terms of, I know some publishers are maybe more resistant to jump onto the next platform. Interestingly, with ESPN, you guys were one of the first partners on Snapchat Discover when it launched back in January 2015, back when no one knew what Snapchat was.
Yep.
And the strategy has changed there, but I guess in terms of looking at ESPN strategy, are you just no matter what comes out, you're going to go there, or do you wait?
No, so my prior life before this job was doing product, and it was so I headed up our product team, and it was a very similar strategy, which is I believe you either have to be first and do a great job. And when that doesn't make sense, sit back, watch, learn, and then choose to enter at the right time. And so we did that with all the platforms, right? If you want to access the ESPN app, it's on every platform. If you want to, so on and so forth. There are times like Snap. We weren't just one of the first launches on Discover in 2015. We were also one of the first shows when it rebooted. And we look at that as something that, if we're going to do that, that's a significant investment, both in people and time and effort, number of people and different kinds of skills. But if we're going to do that, we want to do that really well. And Snapchat is a phenomenal platform. The show, I'm very proud of what you all do every day, and the numbers are significant. And then there are times when something comes out, a platform, and again, it might affect where we want to put digital reach. It might affect social executions, where you have to decide the concept of a minimal viable product. Does that make sense here? Can you do something and launch and be proud of it in a way that sustains and learns, or should we sit back and watch? We think about that all the time. We had 2 efforts go up the day of Instagram TV because that coincided with the NBA draft, which is a marquee event for us, great content, and we thought it was important to be there and try it. Do we know what it means yet? No, we don't fully understand how those numbers sit next to another Instagram post or a story we did that night, but that's the fun part. You can sit back and watch and learn.
Isn't that, too, the way it should be? I mean, I'll speak back to like my prior life before working at ESPN. I toured as a musician for 20 years out of Nashville, and, with some really successful acts. And one of the things that we, where the music industry missed, I mean, there's these stories about the music industry spending millions of dollars developing players that integrate into MySpace, and it took them so long to figure it out that by the time they got it launched, MySpace is gone. So there's a fine line between getting in too early and then realizing you've missed the boat. But I can speak to the fact that the music industry as a whole missed the boat for a generation, and it set them back for a generation, trying to figure out how to monetize, trying to figure out where to make money and how to make money. I'm in the middle of a hurricane going the opposite way. I feel like I'm glad that we jump in with both feet and say, okay, I don't know what this is going to be, but let's figure it out.
Yeah, my point of view on almost everything is we should test everything. And we should go into any effort and say, before we do it, how would we define success or failure? It will likely be somewhere in between, but at least have an idea going into it that we understand what we're measuring and what we would determine or classify as success. And then you can make the determination quickly, and that's the key to it. If you test things, you also need to understand quickly whether you did think they were positive or negative and adjust. And I think the very first rankings reaction shows we did on Twitter were nothing more than, we want to try this.
Oh, and I mean, I can't overstate that enough. I'm sitting in Mike Golick Jr.'s house on his couch with an inflatable horse around me for some reason, because we thought that was a good idea. And people were filming with their phones trying to figure out what we were launching, and we had no idea what the hell we were going to talk about. So we knew that there were going to be...
Still don't.
Yeah, that's fair. But we knew there were going to be rankings. We knew that college football fans are fired up, and we knew that college football fans get fired up on Twitter. So the question was, how could we give them something entertaining? But every single week we went back to that show at Junior's house, it was completely different. The way it was being filmed, the way it was, because it was a work in progress.
And I don't think we would have gotten to the point where we have now a series of runs that we are committed to, Twitter's committed to, if we hadn't tested those early ones. And by the way, we didn't know what we were doing from a distribution standpoint, let alone the content side. Like, you have to figure that stuff out. If we had made the first effort something that where we thought we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't have worked as well.
What have you guys noticed about the different audiences between the platforms? So we've talked about Snapchat and Twitter. Some would say like they skew really young, just like overall. Mm-hmm. But in terms of ESPN's audiences, is that true? And are you really speaking to a younger generation compared to what you do on television and your own properties?
We know that definitively is true. Each platform is itself a little different. Snap, obviously, very young, and predominantly under 35. If you step back and say, what is the audience and how does he or she differ on each platform, I think that's also just as important as age or anything else. We do billions of YouTube impressions. That is intent driven. and it is long tail. We do billions of Twitter impressions. Those are live and have to be of the moment, very different. Facebook sits somewhere in between. Instagram, remarkably visual. Snapchat, very young. And you'll see, even as both of you guys talk on Snap, it is a different tone and visual presentation than what we think would work on a YouTube.
Yeah.
So, again, it's not just how does the audience look different from one another, but what is that user's habit and intention when he or she opens up that platform, or how does he or she find our stuff, which is very different platform to platform.
We talked a little bit about the content of what you guys do on Snapchat. Katie, can you speak to, in terms of like talking to an audience on there? I feel like some days it's like, talking to kids. How do you do, fellow kids? Like, how do you make sure, like, in terms of your job, how do you not do that? And how does it differ to what you do on television?
Yeah, it's funny because in the industry as a whole, for better or for worse, I'm looked at as like a younger person, and that's why I work on Snap, I assume. And then I get to Snapchat, and they're like, "You're old." Okay, so you do have to try to find out like how to talk to kids without being like, "Right, kids," because they don't like that. And I make a lot of references like '80s movies that a lot of times the Snap producers are like, "Maybe we don't, just in case they don't get it." No, but with Snapchat, for me, what really stood out when I was, talking to Ryan and our team about working on that platform was that you're opening up that app to talk to your friends. It's like if you could open up your text message app and there was content there made for you. You wouldn't want something that felt sterile, that felt corporate. It needs to feel like, well, I got this snap from my friend telling me like, "Hey, look, I'm on vacation," and showing you vacation, and then I flip over, and then there's a person saying, "Hey, look, here's what happened in sports today." And so what ESPN brings is the authority. You know that they're not going to tell you something incorrect. So it's not unprofessional, but it isn't, it wouldn't work elsewhere. It feels a little, it would feel, I don't know, not like superfluous, but it's just a little more casual than it would be anywhere else. And so that's why there's people sometimes who, go and watch the show and are like, "I don't get this." I'm like, well, that's because it's not for you. You sought it out, but it's for the people that are there, that are experiencing that app, that know that app. There's still things about the app that I'm like, what? I didn't know that. But kids get it. And so it's talking to them like they're your friends, which for me is easy. Some days I go to work, I leave, and I'm like, that was it? That was so easy. It was just like I was talking to the producer off camera about something, and then I found out that made it into the show, because it's authenticity is like, I'd say maybe the number one thing they're looking for. They don't want somebody who's there to fake it.
Yeah. Let's go back to now television. So some would argue it's like live TV and sports is pretty much the last like stronghold in rights and money aspects. Like for instance, in AT&T's new thing they're calling Watch, like they may have the rights to Turner now, but they're not going to include any sports in it. So in terms of how that relates to ESPN, would you say you guys still like have this stronghold of television rights that you don't try to lose and put into digital properties?
Well, we should be clear. We put it into digital properties all the time. ESPN.com will do 125 to 150 million uniques a month. We'll do multiple tens of thousands of live events streamed via the app. We put it into E+. We do it all the time. What we choose to then put between TV, ESPN.com, ESPN app, maybe E+, like how that fits with other platforms, I think that's right. There's a difference between putting those games there versus on our air. But we broke down the NBA draft, which is televised on ESPN, available streaming in the ESPN app with big numbers, and clips of it and highlights and analysis were available throughout ESPN.com for free across Twitter, with 1.5 million people on a Twitter show. We want to amplify those events as significantly as we can, and to do that, you need to be and speak to fans in the places where they are. But we definitely put a lot of effort into our own digital properties.
There's also sort of an element, to go back to what Katie was saying earlier, like there's an element to understanding your audience and who you're reaching to, and also where they're consuming the game. Because or whatever the broadcast is, when we did the NFL Live Twitter stream, and that was me, Golick Jr., Mina Kimes, and Field Yates. And it was meant to be casual. It was meant to be sort of laid back. We also were very clear to everybody, even when we promoted it on radio, we weren't looking to replace the way somebody watched the draft. We're looking to augment it. So you can have there's a realization somebody's going to have the draft on ESPN. They can watch Trey and the guys do a great job. If they want to see a different take on it, they can come over to where we are. There has to be a realization, the same with the Rankings Reaction Show. Like, Twitter is not going to replace, at least right now, the way people are consuming their information. So if we can augment it, that's great. But then on Snapchat, it's all about what can we use that we have highlights of that feeds a story. And if you don't have any of that, then, she's interesting. I'm not interesting enough to carry it without a highlight.
I think the college football playoff is a championship game in particular is a great example. Because you and Golick Jr. were live from the field for the hour before the game on Twitter, and I think 2.2 million people, some large number of people, watched that show.
I think we got over 3. I don't want to be picky, but I think we got over 3.
3 million people. That culminates, hopefully it's a great show, it was, but it culminates with, all right, time for the game. The game occurs, the game ends, you were on the field filming Snapchat. Meanwhile, we're cutting the clips, distributing the highlights via the app, via Twitter, Facebook, wherever that might be. And then you, I think, did the afternoon for the game. Mm-hmm. The remarkable, overtime and all the analysis around what Saban did, et cetera. We're covering it in all angles, in all the places. But if you want to watch the game, we want you to watch that game. And we weren't interfering with that.
How much do you guys do social listening in terms of looking at Instagram, other people not on your team, looking at Instagram for other people's posts or Twitter or anything, other properties?
How often are we going on social media?
Exactly.
Oh, a lot.
Is this you personally or professionally or both?
Well, so that's the thing. It's kind of both. There's kind of isn't a line. I can't use social media personally and then have it not affect me professionally. I've learned. Whether you like it or not, it's the same thing. So, I'm constantly seeing what other people are doing, like how they're doing their thing and how they're doing their other platforms thing, just to see what works and what doesn't, and to learn from other people's mistakes. Because everyone, like you kind of said before, you kind of figuring out as you go. So to not see what other people are doing is just a detriment to you, because you're having to relearn the lessons that clearly they're already learning. So yeah, I'm always consuming professionally social media.
But to Katie's point earlier, the people that don't get Snap, you also have to understand who your audience is and who's coming at you. Twitter guy that wants to yell at you about how awful the Snapchat show is the old Twitter guy that the show wasn't intended for in the first place. So you do have to separate a little bit, the feedback you get, because feedback, frankly, whether, that's the coolest part about radio is that, on a 3-hour radio show every night, you start to have this personal connection. It feels like fans feel connected to you. They get to know you. They know about my wife and dogs, and then you get to know them on Twitter while you're doing a radio show. That's amazing. But when Twitter guy complains about Snapchat, you just have to sort of compartmentalize it, crumple it up and throw it away, because he's, get off my lawn guy that doesn't understand why we're on Snapchat in the first place.
Yeah.
I think there's 2 tactical pieces to it as well. One is every day we have a fantastic editorial team who itself has dashboards running of what's trends, what's topics. We do a lot of articles and reporting and also social posts of what other athletes are saying. That all comes through social listening. On the pure kind of social element side, I think where the Twitter shows become interesting is when they are itself interactive. And to do that, you need to both, I think we've learned, you can't force discussion or topic. You need to surround yourselves with topic and discussion that's already occurring. And so that itself requires the social listening. And in some ways, it's very radio-like, right? And that's why we've had a lot of success with talent like Fitz that is great on both platforms. We have a Facebook show called First Take Your Take, which by definition is social listening, right? Today at 3 p.m., we'll post a 10-minute or so show of Stephen A. and Max debating a topic. And it will end with, we want your opinion. Come post it in the Facebook group. And over the next 48 hours, fans upload their own opinions. Wednesday at 3 p.m., we have a team who's curating those and positioning them into a fun, good-looking video that comes out Wednesday. Wednesday ends with, did you see your face here? Let's come back Friday and see one of you debate Stephen A. or Max live. Cool. And so that itself is social listening, right? It's interactive.
Awesome. Let's talk about, you mentioned your dog and your wife. In terms of like personal things like that, and two, just like talking about in your jobs as personalities, sure, your main job is sports and talking about sports, but how do you like incorporate things of the moment? And we don't have to get into politics, but maybe just pop culture.
No, I do think that there's sort of, the word that Katie used is authenticity. And this is a conversation that we have a lot as we try and figure out for each meeting that you're on, the best way to convey yourself. Like, I have to be real. Nothing's going to change the fact that the guy that wants to come at me and say, well, you never played football, obviously. I'm 5'9" and a half and 175 pounds. I never played football. Good Lord. I was a fat kid that played the violin growing up. So I think at some point you just sort of have to embrace that, And when I think back to the people that I grew up watching on ESPN, the Rich Eisens and the Stuart Scotts and Dan Patricks and all those people. Like, when I grew up watching those people, you felt like you got to know them. You felt like you had some sort of, that's what makes the This Is Sports Center commercials so cool. Like, you feel like you get to know somebody, right? And I think that that's the most important part across all of it. For me, there isn't a huge divide between off-air me and on-air me. Like, I'm kind of a goofy guy. Like, and that's just how I chose. I don't ever want to put on a front. That's important, and I think that's ultimately, the hope is that whatever the next generation or current generation of ESPN fan is eventually buys into what I do because they see me on different platforms, realize that I'm always some iteration of myself, and they decide, I kind of like the guy. And that's, but I'm also, as a general person, sort of lighthearted and, like you mentioned the hardcore issues, I kind of stay away from those in life in general. So it doesn't create a great challenge for me. It's just a matter of making sure, like, I'm as likely to tweet out a picture of my dog as I am to tweet out something about how the Patriots suck and the Raiders are the best.
Wow.
That's throwing shade.
I'm much more likely to tweet out a picture of your dog than any of those things. No, for me, it's I've always, from the start, made sure not to represent myself as anything other than what I am. I've never been like, I'm a hardcore expert who used to play, who knows everything about these. I am a fan who's so interested in all of it. The sports, the things around the sports, the conversation that the people who are having sports are having outside of their sport. All of that, I think, is interesting. And I think that a lot of sports fans are the same way. No, I don't know a single person who's just like, I only watch games and then I go to my job. Like, you have a life outside of that. You're interested in the things that happen in the game. And so I think your question's more interesting for a person that's like an expert or a former player of how they do that. For me, it's like, it would be weird for me to put up a wall between the life I don't have and work, because I've always just kind of been like, look, I'm a person who loves sports. I grew up loving sports. I'm from Boston. I'm proud of it.
I know.
And there's nobody in sports media who is from Boston, so we really need to fill this hole.
You can, when you acknowledge it was a fumble and there's no such thing as
anyway,
we can be
so what I was saying, it just is, authenticity is super important, and for me, never pretending like I know something that I definitely don't know. There's a ton I don't know, and working at ESPN, the best thing is that there's plenty of people I can talk to find out the thing I don't know. Or I can spend 3 hours on the internet researching why that dog is able to skateboard. I just have the ability to do that. So, I don't really put up much of a wall because I don't think I offer much if I do.
But I will speak as someone that consumed your previous products and now know you. You are exactly...
Previous products. I used to make a smart water.
Yeah, it was great.
It's delicious, but it's
fantastic. I was just finding a nice way to say that. As a Katie Nolan fan, now a Katie Nolan coworker.
And friend.
But I do think that there's a genuineness to you that what came across is real because it is real.
It's people like to think of it as a talent. It's not. I don't know how to be any other way. It's sort of like a lack of a talent. Like, actors have a talent. They go out and are a different person. I'm like, how do you do that? I just do this all the time.
Right, in terms of how that relates to your job, like, what would you even notice, like, kind of on the not being the talent side of it? Like, how much do you think is, like, scripted and production versus, like, relying on these talent personalities to just ad-lib?
The most important word is you said earlier. It's authenticity. And most of, it might change over time, but most of the worlds we live in generally are live. Even the Snapchat shows, while they are produced, we try to film those in lighthearted, lightweight ways. And so they don't come across as stiff. They don't come across as produced. If you think about the people who are the faces of a lot of these platforms, whether these two or Stephen A. or Gola Jr. Or L. Duncan, they're people with big personalities who are balanced expertise, but also, again, the ability to carry time and interact. And I think the interaction part is really key. So the personality can't be manufactured, but it is such a core part to what we do. If I was even a little talented or an expert, it doesn't mean you have personality and are able to do this, right? And so the expertise, like, that has to be there in some form, but the personality and what you can sense just sitting between these folks, like, that's what matters, and they have to come across authentically.
I think you're a little talented, for the record.
Just no personality.
No.
Well, we'll work on that. I do have to say, though, to the credit of, because you asked about production and everything, like Snapchat is sort of there's a line for every host. Every host handles the Snapchat staff very differently. Some like to write every word, some like to get a script and then adjust it, and some just want to read scripts that individual segment producers are writing. So every host is different. To that team's credit, I'll go back to the national championship game. We wanted to get the episode of Snapchat with the confetti still falling and, you know, the marching band literally walking through the while I'm taping to pick up confetti off the ground. We wanted that. So it was important that we had to be able to turn that episode out quickly. To that staff's credit, they had written a lot of the highlights, and it was funny to me in a very good way. Like, I'm a cheesy guy that makes a lot of stupid puns. Every one of them had put like 4 stupid puns in because they know my tone enough as a host. So there is some level of, I think, one of the talents that the Snapchat team has particularly is that whether they're getting Katie or Mike or Elle or me, who are all very different in how we process the show, they adjust their workday every day to go around what we do well. So it does take a lot of like the word talent is used so flippantly at ESPN. Everybody has talent. It takes a lot of talented people to make us look good, except for Spoon. He's just smart and pretty.
Let's talk about audio. So I've heard, there's a big push into a lot of publishers these days doing audio, whether that's investing more in radio or using Alexa voice skills or doing podcasts. Kate, I know you've been in the podcasting world for a while, but as it relates to ESPN, what would you say overall is your audio strategy? What have you done in the past, and what are you doing differently now?
So I used to have a
podcast?
No.
Oh.
Did it have a clever name? Like Spoons, something? Come on, there's got to be a clever...
Spoonful of
I'm going to let
podcast.
you know. I was more talking about a PowerPoint presentation.
Oh.
I have a PowerPoint presentation, and it started with 3 things, which is, us as TV, but we have a huge audio business. And like, take podcasts out for a second. The other one's digital, but we have we are on air, you're on air, 24 hours a day, and then some, with the number of events and shows we cover. We have had real success over the years. I think we were really early into podcasting at significant scale, both turning shows into podcasts, but then we have, and you know this well, podcasts that are standalone. And an example of where these things all meet in the middle is we are the leader in fantasy sports. Fantasy football obviously being the largest. Fantasy has a podcast that does massive numbers and it's a 60-minute podcast. It gets listened to for 60 minutes. Like, these are huge, and it's published 5 times a day. And the beautiful part about it is there's a rhythm to it. On Monday, did your team win or lose? On Tuesday, who should you be preparing for waiver wire? On Wednesday, injuries. Thursday, game. Friday, predictions, etc. Every show has its own thing. And we're now, this year, with Twitter, going to turn that podcast will continue, but Fields, Stefania, Barry, they will turn that also into a live Twitter show.
And Dop. Don't forget Dop.
And Dop.
Important.
He's great. But if you want to interact and take part in the podcast or the show, you will do that via Twitter. And then if you want the produced version to go in your back pocket or while you drive into work, you can listen to that on the podcast. So these things all sit together. Just like, I think there is something to radio, and you know this better than anyone, the ability to interact, carry time, adjust, and move, that translates really well into some of these live platforms.
Well, and we have to acknowledge, like Spain and Fitz being 6 to 9 p.m., there are some markets carry us, some markets that don't. There are some markets that carry us for an hour, and then we get dropped because they're carrying their local whatever, game of the night for whoever they have rights to. So our producer does a great job the next day of tweeting out hour by hour what was on the show, right after the episode, but then the next day. And we see a spike in Twitter interactions in the middle of the afternoon. I'll always get a handful of tweets that are reacting to last night's show, because even if we got cut off in a market, the podcast space still lets us catch it. At the same time, Sarah Spain, my co-host, has her own podcast, that's what she said, and she can sort of dive into, she has long-form, hour-long guests every week, and she can dive into whatever she wants. And Elle Duncan and I co-host a music podcast where we deep dive into music. So again, going back to how you let people get to know everything about you, the podcast space actually really lets people get to see me in every capacity of who I hope they like.
Yeah. Katie, anything to add about what you like about podcasts and audio?
For me, I know there are podcasts that are more structured that have, Monday you can expect this, like the fantasy show. We're in the process of figuring out what that's going to be. I was not working for a little bit, and so when I got to ESPN, I was like, I got a lot to say. I haven't been able to say it for a while. And so we just kind of hit the ground running, starting a podcast, and we're figuring it out as we go. But that's what I love about that medium, and is that we have these fans now who will try a segment, and they'll be like, you should name it this. And we're like, what a fantastic idea. Or you should never do that segment again. We're like, you got it. And they're kind of helping us build this thing. And so I've found that for whatever reason, and I should probably look up the reasons why, I don't know, maybe that's your job, the podcast audience is very engaged. Mm-hmm. They are passionate, they are vocal, they're listening, they're talking, they're sharing, people send me pictures on Twitter of texts between their friends about things we said on our podcast. It's crazy. We've had people call in and leave voicemails like, I'm going through a breakup and I need some advice. Like, you called us? Okay. They let you into their life, and you're talking to them for a long time, so you sort of have this connection with them. I had somebody once, I was in a store and I was ordering lunch, and a person turned around and was like, I could have sworn my friend was standing behind me, and then I realized it's not my friend, it's you, but I hear you the same way I would hear a friend's voice. Now I'm uncomfortable. And I was like, me too, it's okay, everything's fine. But really, these people, it's just like you really get to just curate your own audience and talk to them about whatever you want, and they'll be really forgiving, and then they'll give you constructive criticism. And I love podcasting. It's so fun.
Let's talk about the future of ESPN. Ryan, what's your job for are these two going to still be employed? But beyond that, what's your job in the next
No, really,
years?
we would love an answer. Very specific on this.
This is easy then.
Oh, okay.
I think the focus for us right now on a lot of things is we've tested our way. We've been doing this as this kind of combined entity or group for sub a year. And I think we know where we want to be, but there's a lot that now we have to polish and figure out, and we've put a big year ahead of us. A lot of the sports year for so many people in this room really starts in September, when football and school's all back in session. And so for us, we have just a slew of things starting in September, and I think now, July, are about tuning up. August is, it's live. That's when the discussion starts, and so we're getting towards that. The real focus to me is how do we drive interactivity around some of these. So it is truly something that stands out and is not just another version of an on-demand take on video, and that has to come from each platform and each creation that we are crafting for that platform.
Katie and Jason, anything in particular you guys are looking forward to?
I don't know what I'm allowed to say, but I am looking forward to my show.
Teaser.
That should be around the time you just were talking about.
Yes.
I think.
September will be great.
September will be a good month, I think,
Sweet.
is what I'm looking forward to, vaguely.
That was well
Thank
done
you.
by
I'll be crashing and burning.
I'll be even less specific in an answer, but I will say this. Like, so I read the ESPN book, the behind the scenes beginning of the ESPN book, as we started Snapchat. And it was funny because what a lot of people don't realize about the Snapchat thing is that there are, like, especially until weeks ago, you would go to this one specific area to film, right? And you'd have to wait on the night show. That, like, if SVP is coming in from a certain time, or if Linda's doing a West Coast thing at a certain time, you have like these pockets where you can film. And if they change the lights, you got to start all over and you got to change everything. And so, like, you're carrying cameras across campus and you're carrying like a laptop because it has your script in it. You're like, okay. So there's this total grassroots feel to it. It's rare when you come to a company that's been as successful and as pioneering as ESPN has been for so long to be a part of something that feels like uncharted waters, untested. And that's what Snapchat has been. That's what Twitter has been. And we joke about it a lot on the nights when you're sitting around and you're thinking, man, this has been crazy. But this is our opportunity. Whatever that next chapter of the book is, this is our opportunity to be the guys that they'll look back on someday and say, those idiots managed to accomplish this. That's that's probably the most exciting thing.
Or they'll just say, those idiots.
Either way.
One or the other.
Either way
they're talking about us.
Good or bad, they're talking about. No, I think but that's the coolest thing is that, as somebody that's been around this company for a year, that year, like if you'd asked me a year ago what I'd be doing today, I would never have imagined this. So I think that there's like a sort of a what the hell is going to happen next thing that I really dig.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you guys. Looking forward to those next chapters.
Thank you.